This is every Canadian aircraft of World War II. Fighters, bombers, flying boats, trainers, transports, over 70 machines. Some legendary, some forgotten. Some held together mostly by ice and determination. Canada entered the war with barely a dozen modern aircraft. By 1945, the Royal Canadian Air Force had become the fourth largest air force in the world. This is how they did it. First up, fighters and interceptors. Hawker Hurricane. This British-designed fighter formed the backbone of RCAF fighter squadrons in the early war. Canadian factories built over 1,400 of them. It was rugged, forgiving, and capable of absorbing punishment that would destroy flashier aircraft. Supermarine Spitfire. The iconic elliptical-winged interceptor, Canadian squadrons flew multiple variants from the Battle of Britain through D-Day and beyond. Pilots universally loved it. Ground crews universally cursed its narrow landing gear. Hawker Typhoon, a massive brute of a fighter bomber. Canadian squadrons flew these low and fast over Normandy, using rockets and cannons to smash German armor. It was dangerous to fly, but devastating to the enemy. Curtiss P-40 Kitty Hawk, the shark-mouthed fighter that defended Canadian coasts and fought in the Mediterranean. It wasn't the fastest or the highest climbing, but it was tough, available, and could take a beating. RCAF pilots made it work. Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk, the earlier, lighter variant of the Kitty Hawk. It served primarily in home defense squadrons along the Pacific coast. Japanese invasion was considered a real possibility in 1942. North American P-51 Mustang. By 1944, Canadian squadrons received this legendary long-range escort fighter. It could accompany bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Many considered it the finest piston engine fighter ever built. Brewster Buffalo, a controversial American fighter briefly used by the RCAF. It was hopelessly outclassed in the Pacific. Canadian units wisely kept theirs for home defense duties where they never faced serious opposition. Grumman Martlet, the British name for the American Wildcat. A few Canadian naval pilots flew these stubby, tough carrier fighters. They were not elegant. They were survivors. Bristol Beaufighter. This massive twin-engine heavy fighter served with Canadian squadrons in the strike role. It carried torpedoes, rockets, and cannons. Coastal Command crews called it the Whispering Death. German sailors called it something less polite. De Havilland Mosquito. The legendary wooden wonder. Canadian factories produced nearly 1,100 of these remarkable machines. Built primarily of plywood, it was faster than most fighters. It served as bomber, night fighter, pathfinder, and reconnaissance platform. It could do almost anything. Next up, bombers and attack aircraft. Avro Lancaster. The mighty Lancaster was the definitive heavy bomber of RAF Bomber Command. Canadian-built Mark X versions rolled out of factories in Ontario. Over 400 were produced. Canadian squadrons flew countless night raids deep into Germany. The losses were staggering. So was the bravery. Handley Page Halifax. This four-engine heavy bomber served alongside the Lancaster. Canadian crews flew thousands of sorties in these machines. It was overshadowed by its more famous stablemate, but carried the war just as surely. Vickers Wellington. The twin-engine Wimpy, named after a cartoon character, its geodetic construction made it remarkably resilient. Canadian crews trained on Wellingtons before graduating to heavies. Some flew them operationally in Coastal Command. Bristol Bolingbroke. This was the Canadian-built version of the Bristol Blenheim. While obsolete as a frontline bomber, it found its true calling patrolling Canadian coasts for U-boats and serving as a trainer. It guarded the shores when few other planes were available. De Havilland Mosquito B. The bomber variant of the Wooden Wonder, it carried a 4,000-pound bomb load without any defensive armament. It didn't need guns. Nothing could catch it. Douglas Boston. A fast American light bomber used by Canadian squadrons in tactical roles. It was known for low-level precision attacks. Crews appreciated its speed and solid construction. North American Mitchell. The B-25 medium bomber. Canadians flew these twin-engine bombers in tactical squadrons. It was the same type that Jimmy Doolittle used to bomb Tokyo. Solid, reliable, and punishing to enemy ground forces. Consolidated Liberator. The B-24 in American service. Canadian Coastal Command squadrons flew these very long-range patrol bombers hunting U-boats in the Atlantic. Its range was extraordinary. Its comfort was not. Handley Page Hampton, an unusual twin-engine bomber with an extremely narrow fuselage. Canadian crews called it the flying suitcase. It was cramped, uncomfortable, and surprisingly difficult to shoot down. Later converted for torpedo attack duties. Ferry Battle, a tragically obsolete single-engine light bomber. It suffered appalling casualties in the Battle of France. The RCAF wisely relegated it to training duties. It taught many Canadian airmen how not to die in an operational aircraft. Continuing with maritime patrol and reconnaissance aircraft, Consolidated Canso. This was the Canadian designation for the legendary PBY Catalina amphibian. These slow, ungainly machines hunted U-boats across the Atlantic and Pacific. They rescued countless downed airmen from freezing waters. Crews called them many things. Most of them were affectionate. Lockheed Hudson, a militarized airliner that became a vital patrol bomber. RCAF Hudsons prowled the Atlantic coast searching for submarines. One famously captured a German U-boat intact. The crew was very surprised. Short Sunderland, the massive British flying boat. A few Canadian crews operated these enormous patrol aircraft in coastal command. They were heavily armed and could loiter for hours. U-boat crews called them flying porcupines. Supermarine Strenreyer, an aging biplane flying boat. Canadian-built versions patrolled the Pacific coast in the early war. It was slow, underarmed, and completely outclassed, but it served faithfully until better aircraft arrived. Supermarine Walrus, a small British amphibious biplane. A handful served with the Royal Canadian Navy for shipboard reconnaissance and air-sea rescue. It was slow, reliable, and remarkably seaworthy. Canadian Vickers Vedette, an aging flying boat from the interwar period. A few lingered in service for coastal patrol in the early war. They were obsolete before the fighting even started. Canadian Vickers Vancouver, a larger flying boat design. Like the Vedette, it was effectively retired by the time serious combat began. It represented a generation of Canadian aviation that the war quickly surpassed. Bristol Beaufort, a twin-engine torpedo bomber used briefly by Canadian squadrons. It was underpowered and demanding to fly. Torpedo attacks required flying straight and low toward heavily armed ships. Casualties were predictable. Avro Anson. Originally designed as a reconnaissance bomber, the Anson became far more important as a trainer, but early war versions did fly coastal patrols. They were slow, lightly armed, and very determined. Westland Lysander. This peculiar high-wing Army cooperation aircraft was designed for artillery spotting and reconnaissance. Its exceptional short-field performance made it famous for secret agent insertions into occupied France. Canadian squadrons used them for coastal patrol and search and rescue. They could land almost anywhere. De Havilland Mosquito PR, the photo reconnaissance version of the Wooden Wonder. Unarmed and incredibly fast, Canadian pilots photographed targets deep in enemy territory. By the time defenses reacted, they were already gone. Next up, transport and utility aircraft. Douglas Dakota, the legendary C-47, known in civilian life as the DC-3. This was the workhorse transport of every allied nation. RCAF Dakotas hauled cargo, dropped paratroopers, and evacuated wounded. It could fly into almost anything and usually fly back out. Norduin Norseman, a genuinely Canadian design. This rugged bush plane was built specifically for harsh northern conditions. The RCAF used it for Arctic supply, search and rescue, and utility transport. It could operate on wheels, skis, or floats. It was tough, practical, and utterly Canadian. Lockheed Lodestar, a fast twin-engine transport derived from civilian airliners. The RCAF used them for priority cargo and VIP transport. Speed and reliability were its virtues. Beechcraft Expeditor, a light twin-engine transport and navigation trainer. The RCAF operated hundreds of these versatile machines. They connected the vast training bases spread across Canada. Fairchild 82, a Canadian-designed utility transport. It was simple, reliable, and well-suited to northern operations. Bush pilots knew it. Air Force crews trusted it. De Havilland Dragon Rapide, an elegant British biplane airliner. A handful served with the RCAF for light transport and communications duties. They looked like they belonged to an earlier era. They often did. Grumman Goose, A small American amphibious flying boat. The RCAF used these rugged little aircraft for coastal utility duties and air-sea rescue. They could go almost anywhere water touched land. Now trainers, Canada's secret weapon. The British Commonwealth Air Training Plan was one of the greatest achievements of the war. Canada trained nearly 132,000 aircrew from across the Commonwealth. These are the machines that made them. De Havilland Tiger Moth. This iconic yellow biplane was the first aircraft thousands of pilots ever flew. Simple, forgiving, and responsive, it taught the absolute basics. If you couldn't fly a Tiger Moth, you couldn't fly anything. Fairchild Cornell, the modernized replacement for the Tiger Moth and Fleet Finch. It featured a closed cockpit, a true luxury for student pilots training in the freezing Canadian winter. Thousands earned their wings in this machine. Fleet Finch, a Canadian-designed primary trainer biplane. It was smaller and lighter than the Tiger Moth. The RCAF used it extensively in the early years of the training plan. Fleet Fawn, an earlier fleet design used briefly in the 1930s. By the war's beginning, it was largely retired. A few lingered in training units until more modern types replaced them entirely. De Fleet Fort, a low-wing monoplane trainer designed as a transition between biplanes and operational fighters. It taught student pilots how to handle something faster and heavier. The learning curve was intentional. North American Harvard, the legendary advanced trainer, known to Americans as the Texan and to the British as the Harvard. This powerful monoplane prepared pilots for operational fighters. Its distinctive engine note could be heard across the Canadian prairies. Everyone knew that sound. Avro Anson, the reliable twin-engine training workhorse. It trained navigators, radio operators, bomb aimers, and gunners. Thousands passed through Anson's during the training plan. It was not glamorous. It was essential. Cessna Crane, known in American service as the AT-17 Bobcat. This twin-engine trainer was built largely of wood. It prepared pilots for multi-engine operational aircraft. Students called it the Bamboo Bomber, affectionately, mostly. Ferry Battle. The obsolete bomber found new purpose as a gunnery and bombing trainer. Student gunners practiced deflection shooting from its rear cockpit. It was more valuable in this role than it ever was in combat. Stearman PT-27, an American primary trainer, Canada received hundreds under Lend-Lease. It was simple, robust, and nearly indestructible. Student pilots tried very hard to prove that last point wrong. De Havilland Mosquito T, the dual-control training variant of the Wooden Wonder. Pilots transitioning to the fast Mosquito needed instruction. These trainers provided it very quickly.